It was an unusually cold morning in late autumn when Clara Martin decided to take her children out for a walk through the woods. The wind carried the crisp scent of damp earth, and the trees, stripped of their leaves, stood like dark silhouettes against the gray sky. Clara pulled her coat tighter around her body, her breath visible in the cool air. The walk was meant to be a brief escape from the crushing reality of her life. With 3 children, Lily, Jake, and little Emma, and no steady income, she felt as if she was constantly fighting an uphill battle. Bills piled up faster than they could pay them, and her husband, Ben, had been struggling to find consistent work ever since the factory had shut down. Clara had taken on odd jobs wherever she could, from cleaning houses to babysitting for neighbors, but it was never enough. It seemed as though every effort was met with another setback. The weight of the situation was always pressing on her, but she kept up a brave face for her children. She had to. The thought of showing them how worried she was broke her heart. Her children deserved more than this. The crisp autumn air and the gentle rustling of the trees were a welcome distraction, if only for a few moments. As Clara walked, she watched her kids run ahead, their laughter echoing through the trees. Lily and Jake, being older, were darting between the trees and pretending they were explorers. Emma, her youngest, was toddling behind, her small hand grasping Clara's as she smiled up at her mother. Clara couldn't help but smile as she watched them. In this moment, they were free from the stresses of life. But even as they laughed, Clara couldn't help but feel the weight of what they had lost. It seemed like only yesterday that Ben had been laid off. Their home had been foreclosed on, and the money in their bank account had dwindled to almost nothing. Clara often lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how they would keep their heads above water. Suddenly, Clara noticed something strange by the edge of the path. It was a bundle, wrapped tightly in what appeared to be an old, faded blanket. It was odd. No one would leave something like that in the woods. Curious, Clara approached the bundle, her heart racing with a mix of uncertainty and intrigue. Her children were too far ahead to notice, but Clara felt a sudden urge to investigate. She crouched down and carefully unwrapped the blanket. Her fingers hesitated for a moment before they touched the cloth, as if she knew that what lay beneath it could change everything. When the blanket finally fell open, Clara's eyes widened in disbelief. Inside the bundle was a small, intricately carved wooden box, its surface worn but not damaged, with delicate patterns etched into it. The box had an air of mystery to it, as if it had a story of its own, one that had yet to be told. Clara's first instinct was to look around, but the woods were empty, save for the sound of the wind through the trees and the distant laughter of her children. There was no one in sight. She hesitated, wondering whether she should leave the box where she found it, but something in her gut told her that it was meant for her, meant for her family. Carefully, Clara lifted the box and gently opened the lid. Inside, she found not only a small gold necklace, its fine links shimmering even in the low light, but also a folded piece of paper. The paper was old, yellowed with age and slightly crinkled. Her fingers shook as she unfolded it. There, scrawled in a hurried, uneven hand, was one single word: hope. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't explain it, but something about the word resonated deep within her. She stared at it for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of sign? Or was it just a coincidence? A random event with no meaning? Clara wasn't sure. But in that moment, as the wind rustled through the trees and her children continued to play unaware, she felt as though she had been handed something precious, something that could change everything. With the box in her hands, Clara stood up and called for her children to come back. They jogged toward her, curious about the object in her arms. She didn't know yet what this discovery meant, but she knew that for the first time in a long while, something in her life had shifted. She could feel it deep within her bones as they made their way back home. Clara glanced at the box again. The necklace gleamed softly, and the word hope echoed in her mind. It was a small, seemingly insignificant discovery, but to Clara, it felt like a sign, like a reminder that despite the hardships they faced, there was still something worth fighting for. There was still hope. It wasn't much, but for Clara and her family, it was everything. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she set the wooden box on the table. Ben, her husband, was in the kitchen, and the familiar sound of him stirring a pot of soup filled the small, quiet house. He had been working late again the night before, trying to earn a little extra money with a side job, but his exhaustion was evident in the lines on his face. His brow furrowed as Clara placed the box on the table. He turned, clearly surprised by what she had found. "What's this?" Ben asked, wiping his hands on a dish rag as he stepped closer to the table. His voice was low and tired, as though the weight of their financial struggles was beginning to settle in his bones. Clara hesitated for a moment, looking at the box and then back at Ben, unsure how to explain what she had found. "It was in the woods, Ben," Clara said quietly, her voice trembling. I don't know what it is, but when I saw it, I felt like it was meant for us." Ben's eyebrows furrowed as he examined the box. He was skeptical, as he often was these days. The burden of worry had made him cautious, and rightfully so. They had become accustomed to facing disappointment. The idea that something this unexpected could be for them seemed too good to be true. "Let me see," he said. Clara carefully unwrapped the blanket from around the box, revealing the delicate carvings on its surface. Ben's fingers traced the lines of the intricate patterns, his expression softening slightly. The box itself was old, but it didn't appear to be damaged. There was a sense of value to it, something more than just a simple trinket. Ben gingerly opened the box, his eyes falling on the gold necklace first. The necklace was beautiful, far too beautiful for a family like theirs. It gleamed in the dim light, the gold reflecting like it had been cared for with tenderness. But it wasn't just the necklace that caught Ben's attention. Beneath it, tucked inside the velvet lining, was a small yellowed piece of paper. Ben picked it up with a furrowed brow. Clara watched as Ben unfolded the paper. Her heart skipped a beat when he read the single word written in hasty, uneven handwriting. Hope. He turned the paper over, expecting to find more, but the word was all it said. He stared at it for a long moment, his brow furrowed in confusion. Clara felt the same uncertainty gnawing at her, but something about it, about the word, seemed to speak directly to her. It wasn't just a word. It felt like a message meant specifically for them in their time of despair. Ben handed Clara the paper, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hope? What does that even mean?" Clara took the paper gently, her mind racing. She didn't have an answer, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a coincidence. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, something good could come from the mess they were living in. "I don't know," Clara replied, her voice shaking as she set the paper down next to the box. "But I feel like it's a sign. Like we're supposed to find this. Like it's telling us to hold on, that something will change." Ben looked at Clara, his tired eyes searching her face. He had been so worn down by their circumstances that it was hard for him to believe in anything anymore. But seeing Clara's hopeful expression, he felt something stir deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. "This doesn't make sense," Ben said slowly, his voice tinged with disbelief. "But I can't deny that something about it feels different." Clara nodded, her fingers still tracing the edge of the paper. There was a stirring in her heart that she couldn't ignore. The struggles they faced seemed so much larger than this small, unexpected discovery. The pile of overdue bills, the sinking feeling in her stomach when she thought about their future, all of it felt insurmountable. But in this moment, with the box and the necklace and the word hope, Clara felt something shift. It was small, like a light flickering in the dark, but it was there. Ben sat down at the table, rubbing his eyes. The exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but he knew Clara's heart. He could see the spark in her eyes, the way the word hope seemed to give her a glimmer of strength. Ben's own belief in hope had withered over time, worn down by disappointment and constant struggle. He had stopped looking for miracles. But seeing Clara's reaction to the box made him question everything he had accepted. "Maybe it's a sign," Ben said, his voice almost distant. "Maybe we should hold on to it. Maybe there's more to this than we think." Clara looked at him, a tear slipping down her cheek. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of belief, a sense of possibility that had long been buried. She wiped her cheek and looked back at the box. "We can't give up, Ben," she said, her voice steady. "This is something, and I don't know what it means yet, but we have to believe that it means something." Ben nodded, the weight of their lives still pressing on him, but in that moment, a tiny spark of hope ignited in his chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him take a deep breath and wonder if, just maybe, things could change. Maybe it wouldn't be today or tomorrow, but perhaps the universe had a way of sending them the smallest of gifts when they needed them the most. With the box still on the table, the necklace gleaming in the dim light, Clara and Ben sat in silence. For a while, both lost in their thoughts. They didn't have answers yet, but for the first time in a long time, they had something to hold on to, something that could guide them through the darkness. Hope. The following evening, after the unsettling discovery of the box, Clara found herself pacing around the small living room, the golden necklace still in her hands. The word hope kept echoing in her mind like a whisper. But it was the mysterious stranger who had come knocking at their door that evening that stirred something even deeper in her. It was a Thursday, a crisp evening that felt too quiet for the urgency she now felt inside. Clara's mind raced with a mixture of curiosity and concern, her thoughts jumping from the box to the strange woman's visit. She tried to push the thought aside, but the nagging feeling wouldn't leave her. She was determined to get some rest, to forget about the woman at least for the night. But at the back of her mind, She knew something was off. Something wasn't quite right about the way the stranger had appeared. As the evening settled in, Ben sat quietly at the table, his eyes following Clara's every movement. They hadn't spoken much since the discovery. Ben was worn out, his spirit beaten down by too many struggles. But Clara had an uncanny way of holding on to hope, even when it seemed futile. He had been skeptical about the necklace and the word hope, but Clara's belief in it was a spark he couldn't ignore. The knock on the door came without warning. It was a sharp sound that cut through the quiet of the house, and Clara froze. She glanced at Ben, who slowly stood from the table, wiping his hands on his worn-out jeans. He was a practical man. He didn't entertain things like fate or signs. But there was something in Clara's eyes now, something that made him hesitant to dismiss this new turn of events. Clara opened the door, expecting the usual neighbor or perhaps someone selling something, but what she saw left her speechless. Standing on the doorstep was an elderly woman, her back slightly hunched, wearing a heavy green coat. A scarf was wrapped around her neck, her face partially obscured by the wool, but her eyes, those eyes, were sharp and penetrating. There was something unsettling about the way she looked at Clara, as if she knew more than she was letting on. "Good evening," the woman said, her voice surprisingly strong for her age. "I believe you found something that belongs to me." Clara blinked in disbelief. "I'm sorry. I don't think I understand," she replied, her voice trembling. The woman's gaze dropped to the wooden box on the table behind Clara, and Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She stepped aside, allowing the woman to enter, her heart pounding in her chest. As the woman crossed the threshold, she fixed her eyes on the box, the same box that had appeared so mysteriously in the woods. Clara's mind raced. She had no idea who this woman was, or how she could possibly know about the box. And yet, Clara had an inexplicable sense of recognition. Something about the way the woman stood there made her feel like this was no coincidence. I don't understand," Clara said, her words shaky now. "We found this in the woods. It's just, we don't know where it came from." The elderly woman's face softened as she approached the table. Her hands shook slightly as she reached out to touch the box. "It's more than just a box to you," the woman murmured, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "It's a message, a call." Clara and Ben exchanged a glance, both unsure of what to say. The woman continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been waiting for this moment, waiting for someone to find it. It's mine, but it's meant for you?" The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Clara's mind was spinning. Who was this woman, and what could she possibly mean? Her heart beat faster, each word intensifying the mystery that had enveloped their lives. This woman, this stranger, seemed to know more than she let on. "Who are you?" Ben asked, his voice firm but cautious. "And how do you know about this box?" The woman's eyes glistened with tears as she sighed deeply, looking at both of them. "My name is Margaret," she said softly, her voice fragile but filled with resolve. "I was the one who left the box there. Many years ago, when I was young, I had a child, my daughter. I had to leave her, and I thought if I left this box hidden away in the woods, someone like you, might find it." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "A child?" She glanced at Ben, whose face had gone pale. This was not just some random object left behind. This box, the necklace, the word hope. It was all connected. Margaret sat down at the table, her hands trembling as she explained further. I had no choice. The man I loved abandoned me when I was pregnant. I had to leave my family, and I couldn't take my daughter with me. But I couldn't bear the thought of her growing up without knowing that I loved her. So I left this box for her. It's a symbol, a promise that no matter where she went, she would always have hope. And one day when she was old enough, she would find it. Clara listened in stunned silence. She couldn't comprehend what she was hearing. Margaret's story, filled with heartache and loss, seemed to resonate with her on a deep level. She had lost so much, yet she had held on to the belief that someday, someone would find the box. Someone would find her child. Why did you come here now? Ben asked, his voice softening. Margaret wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled wistfully. Because, my dear, I believe my daughter has finally found the box. And perhaps, so have you. The weight of Margaret's words settled heavily in the room. Clara felt a strange connection to this woman, though they were strangers. She had come here not just for the box, but to see if the hope she had clung to for so many years was finally coming true. The two women shared a long, quiet moment, both lost in their thoughts, while Ben sat silently, trying to absorb the enormity of what was unfolding before them. And in that silence, something shifted inside Clara. A new understanding, a glimmer of faith that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change for them all. Margaret's presence in their home felt both unsettling and comforting at the same time. The silence that had enveloped the room after her emotional confession was heavy with unspoken questions. Clara sat across from her, still reeling from the revelation that the box, the necklace, and the word hope had been left for someone else entirely. Someone who was, in fact, Margaret's long-lost daughter. Ben stood at the window, looking out into the darkening evening, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. He was trying to make sense of it all, but Clara could feel the uncertainty in him. She couldn't blame him. This was a lot to absorb. But for Clara, something about Margaret's words had stirred something deep within her. The weight of her own struggles had made her almost forget that there was still a world beyond her pain. But Margaret's story was a sharp reminder that everyone carried burdens, and sometimes they didn't just disappear. Clara's voice broke the silence. You said you left the box for your daughter, but why didn't you come back for her? Her question was gentle, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of unanswered questions. She could see the sadness in Margaret's eyes as she looked down at the box on the table. Margaret sighed, the sound of it filled with years of regret and sorrow. I didn't want to leave her, she began, her voice cracking with emotion. But I had no choice. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. After her father left me, I was alone, with no family to turn to. I had no means to take care of. Her, no way to provide for her. I was young, scared, and had nothing to offer. The only thing I could give her was the belief that she was loved, and the hope that one day she would find me. Clara's heart ached as Margaret spoke, her words resonating with a deep empathy that Clara had only experienced in her own moments of despair. The image of Margaret, alone and pregnant, had been nothing but a distant concept to Clara until now. She imagined the pain and loneliness Margaret must have felt, making the impossible decision to leave her child in the woods, trusting that someone would find the box and pass the message on. "I thought I would be able to find her again. Someday," Margaret continued, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I thought time would heal my wounds and I would have the strength to be with her again. But years went by, and I became lost in the regret. I moved from place to place, but every step I took felt further from her. And then, I just let go of the idea of ever seeing her again." Clara felt the deep pain in Margaret's words. She could relate in some small way to the sense of loss that had shaped Margaret's life. Clara had never had to make the kind of heartbreaking decision Margaret had, but she understood what it felt like to feel the weight of the past and the pain of unmet dreams. Margaret's gaze lingered on the box, and Clara could sense that the memory of her daughter, the one she had left behind, was too much to bear. But at the same time, there was something different now. Something that had sparked hope in the older woman's heart. "I didn't expect someone like you to find it," Margaret said, her voice shaky with emotion. "But I can't ignore the possibility that it's finally happening. Maybe you're meant to help me find her." Clara's breath caught. The possibility felt so surreal, like an impossible dream suddenly within reach. "You think we can help you find your daughter?" Margaret nodded, her eyes never leaving the box. "Maybe not directly, but I think the box holds more than just the promise of hope. It holds a piece of my daughter's past, a key that could lead to her." Clara glanced at the necklace and the paper. The delicate gold necklace was so beautiful, so out of place, in their small, humble home, and the word hope, written in such a hurried, imperfect way, seemed to have more meaning than she could ever fully understand. She wanted to believe in the possibility of what Margaret was suggesting. She wanted to believe that this strange series of events was more than just coincidence. Ben finally spoke, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "We'll help you. If there's even a chance of finding your daughter, we'll do whatever. We can." He looked at Clara, his eyes softening, and for the first time in a long while, she saw a flicker of hope in his expression. Clara squeezed Ben's hand, feeling the weight of the moment. They had nothing to lose, but this was something bigger than just their struggles. It was a chance for redemption, a chance for closure, not just for Margaret, but for their own broken spirits. This box, this necklace, this word, hope, had somehow intertwined their lives. And Clara knew that whatever happened next, they couldn't just walk away from it. Margaret smiled faintly, the tears in her eyes no longer ones of sorrow, but of something else, something that resembled relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice fragile but sincere. "Thank you for believing in me. I don't know where this journey will take us, but I do know that it's finally a journey worth taking." Clara nodded, her heart full of emotions she couldn't quite put into words. She had no idea where this story would end, but for the first time in a long while, she was ready to step into the unknown. "Hope," Clara whispered to herself. "Maybe that's all we need." And with that, the journey they never expected to take began. A journey that would intertwine their lives forever and lead them toward a future filled with uncertainty, but also with the possibility of healing, love, and redemption. The days that followed Margaret's visit were filled with both uncertainty and a renewed sense of purpose for Clara and Ben. The discovery of the box and the connection it had to Margaret's lost daughter had left them both unsettled and yet strangely hopeful. The small, seemingly insignificant box had sparked something deep inside them. It wasn't just an object left behind, it was a thread that connected their lives to a larger story, one that felt like it was waiting to unfold. Margaret had stayed with them for the next few days, her presence a mix of relief and sorrow. She shared more of her life with Clara, slowly opening up in a way she hadn't for years. There were moments when she seemed distant, lost in her thoughts, and Clara knew it was the weight of the years that Margaret had spent longing for her daughter. But there were also moments when Margaret's eyes would light up, the small glimmer of hope she'd held onto for so long breaking through the veil of sadness. Clara was amazed at how quickly she and Margaret had formed a bond that felt as though it had been years in the making, even though they had only just met. It was as if fate had brought them together, connecting them through a shared sense of loss and a desperate yearning for something more. Margaret, in her frailty, had shown Clara the strength it took to hold on to hope, to keep fighting through life's hardships. One evening, as they sat in the dimly lit living room, Margaret looked at Clara with a vulnerability she hadn't shown before. "I didn't think I could keep going," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I spent so many years thinking that I was undeserving of forgiveness, that I had lost everything I could ever love. And now, I've come to realize that I still have a chance, even if it's a small one." Clara reached over and gently took Margaret's hand, her heart swelling with emotion. She understood what Margaret meant. There had been times in Clara's life when she had felt hopeless, when it seemed like no matter what she did, she couldn't escape the weight of her struggles. But now, sitting with Margaret, she felt as though she had learned something new, something about resilience, about holding on even when the odds were stacked against you. "We all have a chance, Margaret," Clara replied softly. "Sometimes it just takes finding the right moment, the right person to make us believe in it again." Margaret nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm sorry for everything I've done. I'm sorry I couldn't give her a better life." Clara shook her head. "You did what you could. And now you're giving her something priceless. Hope. You're giving her a chance to know that she was loved, that you never stopped thinking about her." Ben, who had been quietly observing the conversation from across the room, stood up and walked over. "Clara's right," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "You've already given her more than most people could ever give, and now we're here to help you find her. We'll make sure she knows that you didn't just leave her behind." Margaret's eyes filled with tears at Ben's words. She had spent so many years carrying the burden of guilt, thinking that she had abandoned her daughter, that she had given up on ever being a part of her life. But in this moment, surrounded by Clara and Ben, she felt the weight of that guilt begin to lift, just a little. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that there was still a chance for reconciliation, for healing. In the days that followed, Clara and Ben worked alongside Margaret, helping her gather the fragments of her past, piecing together any clue that might lead them to her daughter. They contacted old friends of Margaret's, visited places where she had lived, and searched for any trace of her lost child. It wasn't an easy journey, and there were moments of discouragement, but each step brought them closer to the truth. One afternoon, while Clara and Margaret were sitting on the porch, talking about the past. Clara glanced at the necklace again. She had come to think of it as more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of the hope that had carried Margaret through all these years. Margaret's eyes followed Clara's gaze, and she smiled softly. "You know," Margaret said, her voice filled with quiet reflection, "I used to wear that necklace all the time. It was my mother's, and she gave it to me when I was young. I thought that if I gave it to my daughter, she'd always have a piece of me with her, even if I couldn't be there." Clara's heart swelled as she listened to Margaret's words. She had always believed in the power of love, in the way it could transcend time and distance. But hearing Margaret speak about her love for her daughter made that belief feel real, tangible. It was the kind of love that could bridge any gap, even one as wide as the years they had spent apart. Margaret's eyes shone with quiet hope. "Maybe she'll find it," she whispered. "Maybe she'll find the necklace, the box, and understand everything I couldn't say to her before." Clara squeezed Margaret's hand. "She will, and when she does, she'll know that you never stopped loving her. She'll know that no matter what happened, you always held on to hope." Margaret smiled through her tears, and Clara could see the burden of regret slowly easing from her shoulders. The journey they had embarked on to find Margaret's daughter had become something much more than just a search for a lost child. It had become a journey of healing, of rediscovering the power of love, and of understanding that no matter how much time passes, there's always room for hope. In that quiet moment, with the sun setting in the distance, Clara realized that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the form of connections made in the most unexpected of circumstances. And for the first time in a long while, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace, a peace that came from knowing that hope, however fragile, was always worth holding on to. The weeks after Margaret's stay passed quickly, each day filled with small victories and moments of hope that had been built upon the foundation they had created together. The search for Margaret's daughter continued, but as the days wore on, Clara began to realize that the journey had become about more than just finding the lost child. It was about healing the wounds they had all carried for years. The box, the necklace, and the word hope had become symbols of something deeper than just a piece of the past. They were anchors that held them steady as they navigated the uncertain waters of their lives. Margaret, despite her frail health, had a renewed energy about her. There was something different in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. Clara saw it in the way Margaret interacted with Ben and the children. She was no longer weighed down by the years of regret and guilt that had defined her existence. Instead, she had embraced the possibility of a future, however uncertain it might be. Clara had spent more time reflecting on her own life as well. She had always carried a sense of guilt for the way things had turned out. Her lost dreams, her sacrifices, the life she had built on the foundations of hardship. But as Margaret shared her own story, Clara began to realize that everyone had their own burdens to bear, and it wasn't the weight of those burdens that defined a person. It was how they carried them. One quiet evening, as Clara was preparing dinner, Ben entered the kitchen, his face glowing with a sense of accomplishment. He had received a call earlier that day, news that was small but significant. He had been promoted at work, given the chance to oversee a new project that promised more stability for their family. It wasn't a life-changing windfall, but for the first time in years, Clara felt like their efforts were beginning to pay off. "You're looking at the new team leader," Ben said with a grin, holding out a letter in his hand. Clara turned around, her heart lifting at the sight of his smile. She knew how hard Ben had worked for this opportunity. It wasn't just about the money. It was about something more. Something intangible that she had only recently come to understand. "That's amazing, Ben," Clara said, her voice filled with pride. She crossed the kitchen and wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. In that moment, she realized that the hardships they had faced together had made them stronger. Their bond, forged through struggle, was unbreakable. Ben kissed her forehead and held her for a moment longer. "I couldn't have done it without you, Clara. You've always been my rock. And I think I've found hope again, too." Clara smiled, her heart full of gratitude. She had spent so many years focused on what they lacked that she had forgotten to appreciate everything they had gained: love, resilience, and a sense of purpose that could not be measured by money or success. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Clara and Ben sat on the porch, enjoying the quiet of the evening. The stars twinkled above them, and the air was filled with the sounds of crickets chirping in the distance. They spoke little, but the silence between them was comfortable, full of understanding. "I've been thinking a lot," Clara said, breaking the stillness, "about everything that's happened, the box, the necklace, Margaret, and about how it's all brought us to this moment." Ben nodded, his eyes focused on the horizon. "I know what you mean. It's funny, isn't it? How something so small can change everything. I've spent my whole life thinking that success and happiness had to come from big things, jobs, money, achievements. But now I see it differently. It's the little things, the connections, the people who come into your life when you least expect them. That's what really matters." Clara's heart swelled at his words. It was the same lesson Margaret had taught her: the value of hope, the importance of love, and the belief that, even in the darkest moments, there was always a chance for change. She realized now that their lives were not defined by what they lacked, but by what they had been able to create together, through hardship, through love, through unspoken promises. "We'll find Margaret's daughter," Clara said, her voice filled with conviction. "And when we do, we'll make sure she knows everything her mother couldn't say. We'll give her the family she deserves." Ben squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with pride. "I know we will. And I'm proud of you, Clara. You've kept the light burning for all of us, even when things seemed impossible." As the weeks continued, the search for Margaret's daughter brought them closer to the truth. They had no guarantees, no clear path forward, but they knew they couldn't give up. The box, the necklace, the word, hope. They had become their guiding lights, reminding them that no matter how long the journey, they couldn't stop believing. One day, Clara received a call. It was from someone who claimed to have known Margaret's daughter. They spoke in cryptic terms, hinting at an address that might lead them to the next step in their search. Clara's pulse quickened as she relayed the information to Ben, and together, they decided to take a trip to follow the lead. When they arrived at the address, they found themselves standing in front of a modest house on the edge of town. Clara's heart raced as she knocked on the door, unsure of what they would find. A woman answered, her face young but weathered, and her eyes reflected a mix of curiosity and guardedness. "Are you here to ask about a box?" the woman asked, her voice trembling slightly. Clara nodded, the words stuck in her throat. The moment had come. This was it. Margaret's daughter was standing before them. The woman took a deep breath, looking down at the ground. "I've been waiting for this moment for a long time." And just like that, everything they had worked for, all the uncertainty and doubt, led them to this moment. It was the beginning of something new, something that would change their lives forever. Margaret's daughter was no longer lost, and the past had finally come full circle.